Here's Angela in Conowingo, Maryland, Democrat. Good morning.
So I called to ask you one question because they were talking about lawfare, which is using the courts to damage your political opponents. Now, I'll get to my question, but let me give you some examples before. In my opinion, I think Trump used lawfare in the 2020 election to damage Joe Biden by claiming fraud when it didn't exist and trying to steal an election. And here's some examples from the Jack Smith report. First, before the election, he said he was going to claim fraud if he lost. Second, there's evidence in there that he admitted he lost the election. Third, in the court lawsuits, Giuliani would get on TV and say fraud, 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 and then he would go to court and tell the judges he didn't have any evidence of fraud. And then Trump's acting attorney general, he asked his acting attorney general, and I quote, "Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and Republican congressmen." I think a lot of these people need to read the Jack Smith report instead of fairy tales on lawfare. But my question is, if those examples are true and the evidence bears it out, do you think that 2020 Trump used lawfare by the attorney generals and the courts to try to overturn a legitimate election that he knew was legitimate?
All right, Angela.
So there's actually some really important points in there. The first one is that Trump has been remarkably consistent about believing that he actually did win the election. Now, this is this is something that we could really unpack for a long time. I'm not in the book defending that position at all, but what I do map out pretty consistently is Trump is across the board. He says, I won that election. It was a legitimate election that I would have won. And there was only one incident that I could find where he even indicated at all he may have lost. He said on some podcast that he lost by a whisker, and that was one time. And every other time he has been very consistent that he believes he won. And that's just his position. I'm not here to defend that position. I'm here to say that he has been consistent with that. And I think that that's a very important point because a lot of people act as though he's been inconsistent. And he hasn't. And I think that his administration using lawfare, if he did, it was incredibly ineffective when he was doing that. But I do acknowledge in the book that Trump contesting the election, even though he relied on precedent that I think was set up by John F. Kennedy in terms of trying to convene these alternative electors. It wasn't his idea. It was Democrat John Kennedy's idea to do it. That's not something that that's not the point of the book. And I do acknowledge it as an example of Republican conservative lawfare, but I'm saying that both sides practice it. The Democrats just practice it much more robustly, and they've been much more effective when doing it. And they've also been able to harass conservatives and Republicans a lot with it. I cite people who've been disbarred, and I cite a whole apparatus that allows for that to happen.